Boris Johnson continues to be the tough negotiator. The week before last week, he declared the Brexit negotiations over. Now the U-turn has followed. Inside or tactic? Political theatre was what the CSU European MP Manfred called Boris Johnson's announcement to break off talks on the Brexit trade package. As a theatre, you actually have to classify a lot of what is currently going on between the EU and London. With this strategy of maximum demands on the EU, the British Prime Minister poses as a strong man, but has to be careful that his threats do not come to nothing. But the EU will also have to make compromises. At the end of the same week, Johnson declared the negotiations with the EU over. But it did not really change the EU's position. A Johnson spokesman was even clearer that day. The trade talks are over. The EU has effectively ended them. Should Brussels not move fundamentally, the team headed by Chief Negotiator Michel Barnier will not have to bother to come to London. So much for the theatre. In reality, of course, London and Brussels continue to negotiate, albeit not at the highest level at first. They did so before Johnson officially announced on last Wednesday that he would return to the negotiating table. Barnier and Frost were always on the phone the days before that. There is no alternative to a trade agreement for either side, regardless of whether it becomes something this year or later. Johnson repeatedly talks about a trade agreement with the EU based on the example of Canada or Australia. The former is currently completely unrealistic. The latter is just a description of a no-deal Brexit. And not even that, Australia got more than the UK would have in a case of a no-deal Brexit. The CETA agreement with Canada is highly complex. The negotiations on it lasted almost 6 years, and it is based on completely different political, economical and geographical conditions than an agreement with the UK. And Johnson actually doesn't want a Canada agreement because there is no duty-free movement of goods in this, which Johnson absolutely wants to negotiate with the EU. The EU's agreements with Australia are also unsuitable as a model for future relations between Europe and the UK. There is no free trade agreement between the EU and Australia. Both sides have only concluded framework agreements for trade, custom duties, and custom duties are also due there. So when Johnson speaks of a contract based on the Australian model, this is only a paraphrase for the situation after no-deal Brexit, in which both sides largely exchange goods according to the guidelines of the World Trade Organization WTO. Although Australia even has some contracts that include, for example, medical products and stuff like that, the UK wouldn't even have that. There are currently 3 sticking points. On the one hand, there is access for EU fishermen to British waters. For the European coastal states, such as France, this is just as emotional an issue as it is for the UK, which finally wants to determine its rich fishing grounds alone. The second central point is the so-called level playing field. In return for duty-free access to the internal market, the EU wants the same environmental, social and subsidy standards as protection against dumping. But Great Britain no longer wants to be persuaded by the Union and insists on its state sovereignty after exiting the EU. This also applies to point 3, the so-called governance. The EU demands a reliable mediation process in the event that one side deviates from the treaty. So far, they've been biting granite in London. However, Johnson has agreed to give up his demand for many individual contracts and negotiate a single large contract as requested by the EU. When it comes to fishing rights, Britain only appears to have a trump card. The background to this is a dispute over catch quotas for more than 100 species and the question of whether these quotas should be negotiated annually or in longer periods of time. Without an agreement with the UK, EU fishermen would no longer have access to UK waters. But Great Britain currently exports around 60% of the fish caught in British waters to the EU. Should tariffs be due on the catches, this market could also suffer considerably or even collapse. If the EU and Great Britain can return to a trusting cooperation, there are around 3 weeks left to conclude a trade agreement. That is tight but feasible, especially since both sides want to negotiate around the clock and also on weekends. Barnier made it clear in a speech in the European Parliament last week Wednesday. I think an agreement is within reach if we are on both sides are willing to work constructively and in a spirit of compromise. Our door will remain open until the last day on which it still works. By the way, I hope you have seen my first premiere where I was talking about many of these speeches on that day in the European Parliament. If not, the video is still available on my playlist though. If both sides insist on their maximum demands, there will actually be a Brexit without the future relations between the EU and Great Britain being clarified. Then the rules of the WTO take effect, but they mean high tariffs for both sides. The EU should also examine an emergency option in the event of a hard Brexit. And everybody's also only talking about tariffs, but there are also quotas involved in the WTO. The commercial contract therefore does not necessarily have to be signed and sealed by the end of the year. If necessary, after a brief unregulated phase, a contract would come into force with a delay in early January. It is now being discussed that in the event that an agreement is not reached by around 10th November, one can accept chaos at the beginning of the year for a few weeks and simply continue negotiations, said a high-ranking EU member diplomat. From the British side, however, it was heard that they would not get involved in that. After a hard Brexit, the WTO rules would first have to be introduced. British diplomatic circles said it was almost impossible that Johnson would negotiate a different solution with the EU during this phase. There are 3 crucial and exciting weeks ahead of us, in which it will definitely be decided how the EU and the UK will deal with each other from 2021 onwards. For this time, one can only wish less theatre, more realism on both sides. And if you now want to know more about European or global politics, YouTube has chosen another of my videos right here for you in the end screen, right next to your chance to subscribe to my channel, which I hope you already did. I'll see you in my next video. Click and enjoy. Viel Spaß!